I have it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of the live Q&A session for the Climate Action Solutions for a Changing Planet. My name is Elena Cree, and I work for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN. We are now in the 7th week of the course. We've covered a wide range of topics from the Paris Climate Agreement. We've looked at deep decarbonization pathways, looking at case studies from Australia to Russia. Moving forward, we're getting more into the technical and the policy side of things. So last week looking at renewables, and this week looking at how satellites can be used to help monitor agriculture and land use patterns. So today I'm very excited to welcome Professor Sachs here with us live. Professor Sachs is the lead professor for the course, as you know. He's a world-renowned professor of economics and leader in sustainable development. He's a senior UN advisor, best-selling author, and syndicated columnist whose monthly newspaper columns appear in over 100 countries. So I could go on and on with his bio, but I'll keep that short from now because we want to hear from him. Just a real quick reminder that this is a live Q&A session. So everybody out there watching on YouTube, please type in your questions in real time, and we will do the best we can to answer them.
Great.
So Professor Sachs, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Elena. Great to be with you.
So we have a half hour here, so we want to make the best use of this time. And we have a few topics that the students have been asking a lot of questions about on our discussion forums that you covered in the first 2 weeks of the course. So I'm going to kind of pose these, and then if anyone has additional questions, they can chime in. So the first one, we're just going to jump right into it with the Paris Climate Agreement. So in June, President Trump announced that the US would withdraw from the agreement. So what consequences have we seen globally for this?
Well, of course, President Trump's move was incredibly irresponsible, really dumb, unfortunately, but very much provoked by American politics. The week before President Trump made this statement, he received a letter from 22 US senators, all Republicans, urging him to pull out. So it's important that people understand what this is about. Those senators, by and large, are on the pay of the oil and gas industry. Pay in the sense that the oil and gas industry funds their election and re-election campaigns. So to my mind, this is mainly about vested interests. There is a powerful oil and gas lobby in the United States. The leaders of it are two famous brothers, David and Charles Koch, K-O-C-H. And between the two of them, they're reputedly worth $100 billion. And they use their money to fund in part, anti-climate change action. In other words, action to oppose steps to get global warming under control. And I believe that Trump, who is irresponsible to begin with, was basically following the lead of the oil and gas lobby and following the lead of the Republican Party, which itself is in the hands of this very powerful lobby. When he issued this statement, there was a lot of concern immediately that other countries would start to break ranks, because remember, when the Paris Climate Agreement was agreed in December 2015, it was unanimous. Every country in the world agreed, including, of course, the United States, where President Obama was delighted to sign on behalf of the United States. So when Trump pulled out, the question was, would some of the big oil countries pull out? Would Russia pull out? Would Turkey pull out? Would Indonesia or Canada or Australia pull out? And the test of that came a few weeks later at the G20 summit. Now, this year, Germany has the presidency of the G20, so the G20 summit, which takes place once a year, was in Hamburg, Germany in early July. I happened to be there for some side events at that time. And the big question for Hamburg was, what was the communique going to say? Was the United States going to be able to pull some of these other oil, gas, or coal countries into the U.S. camp of saying we're not going to do climate change actions? Well, it turned out, and I think it's very notable, that the verdict is 19-1. Every other country continued to subscribe to Paris. The communique says we, the 19, not the United States, but we, the other 19, all declare the Paris Climate Agreement to be non-negotiable. We're not changing the Paris Climate Agreement just because President Trump says boo. And I think that it's an important sign that the global consensus towards action remains. And of course, inside the United States, Trump's move was greeted with jeers and rejection by people all over the country, including hundreds of mayors and politicians across the country. And I think that that's also a good sign. Elon Musk didn't cease to bring out his Model 3 this week. And I can note that this week, JP Morgan Bank said that they would channel $200 billion into renewable energy and other green technologies by the year 2025. There's a lot of momentum. And just because Trump said what he said, it didn't cause the rest of the world to reevaluate, and it didn't change a lot of the market dynamics either.
Thank you for that. So kind of sticking with the U.S. theme, do you think that the U.S. will be able to achieve a decarbonized future without the support of the federal government, knowing that we're hearing a lot that the states are making a lot of brave commitments, and, subnational governments are big actors these days. Cities are, at the forefront. So do you think it's possible in the U.S. despite our administration?
I think as this course has emphasized, the decarbonization is a 30 to 40-year process, even if we're very aggressive and rapid about it. It's not an overnight process. Trump will be long gone, and the U.S. federal government will be for a long time a strong proponent of decarbonization. So we shouldn't take the short term as really very predictive of long-term policies and politics. We'll have the federal government on side, but not in the short term because of Trump. That being said, the process of transformation is very complicated. You need global agreement. You need regional cooperation, because actually even the US, it could, but it wouldn't be advised to decarbonize without actually making some good cooperative renewable energy agreements with Canada and with Mexico, because Mexico's got a lot of solar energy that it could sell to the United States, and Canada has a lot of hydropower that it can sell to the United States. So even not just federal level, but actually transnational is important. Then the national level is important because we have a lot of energy, for example, in the US Southwest, where people don't live in large numbers. We have a lot of wind power in the plains states of the US, North and South Dakota, the American Midwest. But the big population centers are more coastal, or at least near Chicago and Lake Michigan. So we need trans-state transmission lines that are part of a national grid. That's where the federal government plays an important role. Then we need federal government role for R&D, because a lot of the basic science and technology needs to be supported by the public sector, not just the private sector. Then states and cities can do a lot, because people live in cities, and cities have to retool their infrastructure, as we've been studying in the course, retool the building codes, the way that buildings are heated and cooled, retool for sure the transport systems for more walking, for more public transport, and for more electric vehicles. So the answer is we're going to have firepower at every different level. For the moment, since Washington is so corrupt, unfortunately, when it comes to these issues, we rely more on cities and state level. But Washington, I predict, will overcome this resistance. I think the new sectors, the new industries are going to come to dominate our economies, and the oil and gas industry will be a diminishing so-called legacy sector. It'll be fading out over time, like coal has faded out. I don't think it's going to determine too much of our politics in the future. So the answer, Elena, in my view, is for the moment, cities and states, entrepreneurs like Elon Musk. For the long term, we better be really working at every different level, from the global to the transnational, regional, to the national, to the state and city.
Wonderful. Thank you for that answer, Jeff. So we do have a lot of people joining us online right now, and we have a global cohort. So just to give you a flavor, we have people from Rwanda, Netherlands, all over the place. So just to change gears and looking more at the global perspective, Rachel had asked, how will we prioritize agriculture adaptation in Africa and Southeast Asia? So,
you know, the whole land use side of the story is very complicated, because we are not only unsustainable in our energy system, but we're unsustainable in our land use. And this is interacting with climate in some very painful ways. First, climate change is destabilizing agriculture, but agriculture is destabilizing the climate. Because remember that agriculture contributes to greenhouse gas emissions in many, many ways. The energy in agriculture itself, whether it's used in shipping, production, running farm equipment, whether it's the energy that's used to produce the chemical fertilizers, but also the chemical fertilizers, for example, the ammonia-based fertilizers, nitrogen-based, end up putting nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. Even the way we grow food, of course, in flooded rice paddies, releases methane through anaerobic respiration. And our ruminant livestock, especially our cows, from both ends, the front end, the mouth, and the back end, are releasing methane into the atmosphere also, because of the anaerobic respiration taking place in their digestive tract. So agriculture contributes directly to climate change in all those ways. And then take into account land clearing. When you cut down a forest, you release a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. When land is degraded, the soil loses its soil carbon, so degraded land releases a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So agriculture is causing climate change is causing a worsening of agriculture, and we need to put the land use side back into the picture to preserve biodiversity, to make our agriculture productive and resilient, to store carbon, so that we don't violate the budget constraint on water, and so on. All of those reasons mean that we've got a complicated land use challenge, just like we have a complicated energy sector challenge. Ugh, just saying it is enough to make you tired, because the truth is we haven't sorted this out. We absolutely have not figured out what is a sustainable land use pattern for the world or even for any individual country. And just to wrap up, without giving you a good answer, obviously, because I'm just listing a lot of problems, the SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, of which Elena is an illustrious member, is undertaking a project called FABLE. And I think that's a good acronym for you to remember. It's food, agriculture, biodiversity, land use, and energy, FABLE. And the idea of FABLE is bring these 5 sectors together into a harmonized, integrated scientific vision so that we know what we're doing. And to Rachel, I can only say, I wish I could give you more definitive answers. But the fact of the matter is we're way behind the curve on this. And it's a big, big problem. It's one of the big risks of climate change.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad that you admitted that you didn't quite answer a question there, because I was going to push you on the how question, but we are working on it. But you hit a few points: the integrated solutions, intersectoral, multi-stakeholder, all of these convenings that we're trying to do. And even this course is a good example of, just starting to push that needle. So we had another question. So we keep talking about governments and these national commitments and the Paris Agreement, but one of the students asked, how can universities play a role in combating climate change?
Well, universities better play an important role in helping to solve these problems. So I think universities' role starts out with a good understanding of these issues. Most of the world's top climate scientists are in universities or in government research laboratories or in official institutions. So universities are the repository of a tremendous amount of the know-how and the science. Universities are research centers, of course. So if your university is not researching both climatology, that is the science of climate, and also climate solutions, I would say there's more to do. Third, universities are important in the public policy analytics because universities aren't running for office directly. They're not in the short-term politics the same way, so they can take a longer view. People at universities can look 10, 20, 30 years down the road without people yelling at them, but what about today? Because the truth is we need people that are looking down the road also, and universities play a key role for that. And fourth, universities are important conveners. If you're at a university, host a climate change conference that includes government, academia, the business sector, and civil society. Open the doors wide so that the challenges of this course and the questions that are being asked right now are being addressed locally by the leadership of your communities. And I think universities have a very important role to play on that. And I expect some of the key technologies that are going to solve the problems to be coming out of universities. So spin-offs of scientific breakthroughs, of new technologies being developed in engineering schools, all of that is a central part of the role of universities.
Great. And lots of job opportunities, hopefully, for the students and all of the learners on our course in the future.
Well, one thing we're finding is that there is a big and growing demand for this kind of knowledge. And I think it's really true that the world needs you. It needs people who understand these challenges, because these really are the big challenges of the coming years. And our politicians, by and large, we're not raised on these challenges, don't really understand them. And anyway, most of the politicians are not technically savvy, so they need expertise to be able to come up with good solutions.
Great. So Jeff, I'm going to ask you one more question that just came in live for us on the agreement and decarbonization side. And then I'm actually going to switch topics to carbon capture and sequestration, only because there's been a lot of chatter in the course and on our discussion board. So I want to make sure that we get to that.
Wonderful.
So all of those listening online, if you have questions specific for CCS, you can already start typing them in or thinking about them. But here we go, last decarbonization. So Reddy mentioned, so decarbonization pathways talk about sustainable lifestyles, and with rising incomes and rising consumption patterns and, you know, everything just going sky high, how can the government effectively implement these decarbonization strategies and meet our goals?
I think it's important to look at some of the richest places in the world, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, for example. 3 Scandinavian countries, super affluent, great living standards, quite rich, but on the path to full decarbonization. In fact, Copenhagen will be almost emission-free by the middle of the 2020s. What are they doing? They are converting to zero or very low carbon energy sources to produce electricity, and then they're converting to electric vehicles and to public transportation. They're not really going to be zero carbon yet because they import goods from China and elsewhere that are produced in traditional ways. But what the Scandinavian countries are showing very clearly is you can bend the curve. You can be rich and very low emission. And indeed, being rich can help, because think of the Tesla capital of the world. That's Oslo, Norway. Norway is so affluent that they were able to say, look, electric vehicles are still more expensive, though the Model 3 this week is much lower cost. But Norway said, we don't have to wait for the low cost. We'll spend a little bit more because we're a very affluent country. So I think that it's not so much the wealth as how it's used. Of course, people need to not have consumer compulsions to wreck the environment, to buy goods that are dangerous and so on. And consumers as voters need to tell the politicians, let's get on with it. We want to get out of coal, oil, and gas, and we want to get into wind and solar, sustainable hydro, possibly fourth generation nuclear, but we got to get out of the coal, oil, and gas. And that's a big role for us to play in our lifestyles as citizens.
Great. Yeah, we tend to focus on the technology side and the technical solutions because they're almost the easy, you know, low-hanging fruit. But really that culture shift that needs to happen, that's what takes time and commitment. But I think educating everybody and at least having this conversation is a good step in the right direction.
By the way, another interesting culture shift, a big question, comes back to the food. One of the big sources of emission is beef, because you have to feed a cow 10 tons of or 10 kilos of feed grain in order to get 1 kilogram of beef. And so the environmental impact of eating beef is very, very high. And this used to suggest one thing. Now, interestingly, it suggests 2 things. One thing it suggests is lay off the beef, and for very high beef eating countries, it's not even good for us, for our health, how much beef per capita is consumed. So by reducing beef consumption per person, one can make a difference. But now there's another technology angle, which is kind of interesting, and I'm sure many people have heard about or read about impossible foods. And if you haven't, go online and read about impossible foods. It's the brainchild of a professor of Stanford University who is getting plants to grow some of the key proteins found in meat so that a vegetarian hamburger tastes like a beef burger. And this is quite interesting. So the question is, could you save the environment in part by having vegetarian beef burgers? that really taste like beef burgers. And Impossible Foods is just a very high-tech, clever company that is at the cutting edge of trying to find the answer to that.
There was just that piece in the New York Times too about from a futurist about 2040 and what it looks like, and apparently we'll all be eating these synthetic proteins from that point of view. So wonder how it tastes. So Jeff, we have only a couple minutes here, so I really just would like to pose at least one carbon capture and sequestration question to you. Just getting, what's the current state of it? What are some of the challenges with expanding it worldwide? Where is it succeeding and maybe not so much?
So basically, carbon capture and storage has two pieces to it: carbon capture and then geologic storage. And the carbon capture has two parts to it. It could be capture at an industrial plant, or it could be capture directly out of the air. If you take apart all of these different components, you get all different kinds of models as possible. For instance, direct air capture of carbon, but not storing it, but using the carbon and solar energy, say, to produce a synthetic fuel. So that's called carbon capture and reuse, rather than carbon capture and storage. Of course, there's other ways to capture and store carbon biologically by restoring degraded land. So the answer is that carbon storage biologically, that's a big part of the story. Carbon storage industrially, by pumping CO2 back into ground aquifers or ground geologic deposits, such as saline aquifers, is still debated because it's costly and it may just not compete in the end economically with the wind, solar, and hydro power, or with nuclear, for example. So I would say that the technology of carbon capture and storage is improving, but the cost feasibility and the advisability of CCS versus other alternatives is definitely not proven. And the model of carbon capture and reuse by capturing the CO2 from the air or even from the tailpipe of a factory and then reusing it is also being explored. I wouldn't say that at the moment CCS is the most likely item on most deep decarbonization pathways, but it remains in most scenarios, even if we're not sure how much it's really going to be deployed. And it's not being deployed commercially much at all. Yes, there are cases here and there, but it remains unproven from a commercial point of view.
So I'll push you just maybe one step farther. Is it possible to meet the 2-degree limit without CCS, do you think, at this point in time with the technology we have?
We've looked at scenarios that include every option: wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, ocean, plus CCS plus nuclear. We've looked at options that drop the nuclear because some people don't like that. We've looked at options that drop the CCS because some people don't believe in that. I think the bottom line story is that it is probably possible to succeed without either nuclear or CCS, but it's pretty tough and it's surely more costly, or almost surely more costly. So having more options on the table, I think, is better than having fewer options. I believe we need to double down in our research on CCS as well as our research on nuclear. I don't want to leave any options off the table because deep decarbonization is not easy. It's not a piece of cake. It's far from guaranteed in success in the time horizon we have for it. There are many challenges, and I personally don't like the idea of ruling out anything right now when probably we're just going to need to be operating on many, many options in future years.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll start our sign off. But just because Lewis here just chimed in, and I want to make sure I get like one from all the students that are really actively participating. So are there any new cities globally at the master planning stage that have targeted decarbonization and zero emissions and are really taking affirmative action towards that?
It's a great question. There are many more cities than we know that have this underway. And the reason I say this is that good, credible lists of cities that are working on deep decarbonization now number in the hundreds. And I'm proud that New York City is very actively now pursuing a low carbon strategy and looking at new approaches and really looking at 2050. So looking at deep decarbonization strategies and pathways, and Elena will confirm that because she's working together with me and the city on exactly that. So I believe that a lot is going on, but cities are trying to figure out what is our best energy option, what is real and realistic for transport, how can we revise building codes if you're in cold climates like New York for the heating of buildings in the wintertime. What's the role of public transportation in all of this? All practical questions. And I would say to all of you around the world, check out what your own city is doing, get involved, and if they don't have a plan for 2050, suggest that it's time for your city to have a deep decarbonization pathways plan.
So Jeff, that was a perfect segue to our closing here. I will just say, everybody on the course, if we haven't got to your questions, the course TA and I will do our best to answer them either through a discussion board in the course or directly in the chat right afterwards. So sorry, we only have a limited time. So Jeff, just final words. So we're talking to a lot of professionals, people who are already in industry or changing industries. Do you have any general career advice or skill development advice? What do you need to, be a big player in this future that we've been talking about?
Well, thanks to everybody. I believe the future is coming and fast, and that what we're talking about is not the hypothetical, but the likely. And thinking through how we can create a consensus around a strong pathway to a new energy system that includes the buildings, the transport, the industrial sector, and the power generation is required in every place in the world. And I think for your own skill development and for your own engagement in this problem solving, looking at how in your region these issues are being addressed and pushing hard on the leading businesses and government and universities and think tanks to get together and say, what is our pathway to deep decarbonization and how can we work on this together, is really, really getting into it in the most practical way. We designed the course with the idea that this will help you to do that, but my closing words are, go do it.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I hope everyone's feeling inspired. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you in the course.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.